You'll see the little countdown. And then we'll get this going. That's recording. This is recording. And holy sweet shit, Bobby fucking Thompson is in the house. What's
What
going
is
on,
up,
man?
Not much. Thanks for having me.
Man, I cannot, my strongman just fucking background and just I'm like just fangirling so hard right now because you have been somebody that I've been watching for the last several years, and it's just the shit that you do, your overhead press, just your strength is just getting up there year after year after year. And for those who don't know, Bobby Thompson competes World's Strongest Man. Like you're truly one of the strongest human beings on the planet. And it's so fucking cool that we get to sit and talk shit. It's so fucking cool, man. So welcome.
It's weird. I appreciate it. It's weird hearing that. Like I can quantify that statement to myself now. So now it's like, okay, it's kind of cool. Yes, I've worked hard for this. It's still weird hearing that I'm amongst that group of people, though.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I've seen videos with you and Brian Shaw. I've seen videos with like it, and it's so cool to see the strongman community rallying around like behind you and just every time you compete, it's like Bobby Thompson's gonna fucking win this, but and you just hear your name more and more and more, and it's fucking real cool to see because how old are you?
29.
29. Cool. Like you're younger than me.
Yeah.
What the fuck?
I don't feel younger than you. I will say though, it's fantastic. I do garner. I do myself and Trey Mitchell. We garner a lot of hometown support.
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of that is just because we're two good old boys that made good. Like I really hate to say it, but that's what he and I are. We're big guys from no name towns that didn't go play college football. What else? We didn't have too much else that was really going to drift our direction. And I will say that in America, it's definitely Trey and I that garner most of the support.
Absolutely, 100%. So, what I want to know is some of your strongman history. You had said you're a big guy that didn't play college football. Like, where was the point where you're like, I'm just going to lift the shit out of these heavy ass weights?
Man, that was actually it's going to be kind of stereotypical. But I was an athlete for most of my life, and then about 6 months through August my sophomore year, I had a major foot injury. I'd already had surgeries up to that point to try and correct the issue, and it just got so bad that things couldn't continue. And then after that, I got into powerlifting, and it was just kind of one of the situations where I was an angry kid. I was lost, had a lot of things going on in life I didn't know how to process, and I was doing a lot of things I shouldn't have been doing at the time, of course. But one of the things I became obsessed with was training. And I didn't have my parents. They were supportive, but I didn't have my dad wasn't big into lifting. My mom wasn't big into lifting. So it was the first thing that I reached out, I grabbed, I studied, I taught myself, and it just blossomed. It truly did. I didn't expect it to put me where I am now, but it took off. And then from there, I just slowly found other avenues to compete with outside of powerlifting and stumbled upon the strongman.
Mm. Now, did you find that obviously with the overhead strength that is Bobby Thompson, did you find that you just gravitated more towards certain lifts like your bench? Like were you always good at pressing, or was this just something you developed over time?
So I was always obsessed with overhead pressing. I have always hated the bench press. I still hate the bench press. I hate doing bicep curls. I always hated doing bicep curls. So I've always been a good presser. I have, but nowadays I bench maybe twice a year. Like that's it. And then I became early on. I was obsessed with squats, deadlifts, and overhead press. Like that was just always in. Again, I didn't. Yeah,
that's rare, man. Like that's like the overhead press is if unless you compete in strongman, you don't see people do that. That's not like a gym bro lift. That's not something you're going to see at any other gym. Like nobody likes that shit because it's hard.
It's hard. It is hard. And bench press, just for whatever reason, I mean, I wasn't ever bad at it. I did have a little predisposition that kind of helped with the way my feet are, my big toes don't move, and they haven't since I was like 12. So if you think about every athletic sport you do, if you're on the ground and getting up, or if you have to go do up downs in training, you pivot on the ball of that foot, and that big toe comes up. Well, that's how you get off the ground. I never had that luxury, so I had to be able to get my upper body far enough up off the ground, explosively enough I could get my feet flat under me. So I think I truly think years of doing that as a kid may have given me a little boost on pressing. But
that's interesting. Yeah, because and it's funny you mentioned that, because I figured, I mean, years ago when I started strongman, but like the Olympic lifting shoes were just starting to kind of come into for overhead pressing and having that like foundation to press off of. And it was like this light switch.
Yes.
As soon as you threw those bad boys on, you're like, holy shit, this is like a different ball
So
game.
I hate them.
Do you?
I hate them with a passion. It sounds like you and I had total opposing responses to Olympic weightlifting shoes.
Yep. Absolutely.
Like,
and it seemed to work out better for you than me.
It depends. Well, and it depends. I think when it comes to a barbell, they're probably the smartest thing to go with.
Sure.
But in terms of getting weight overhead, but I'm not a fan of squatting with them. I don't believe in having a 10-cent squat and $100 shoes. Sorry, you can keep that. If you can, that's all. It's giving you a little extra ankle mobility. You can argue stability, but if you have any kind of basic body awareness, you can develop that stability barefoot without those shoes and without developing patella tendonitis and some kind of hip impingement, which is what happened to me. But in strongman, where the barbell, it's not just a barbell, it's going overhead. You see a lot of guys wear them on log press, which doesn't make any sense because a log wants to roll forward. That's all it wants to do. So why am I going to put myself in position to push my knees further out over my toes, even if it's corrected by an elevated heel? I still have to drive backwards, and I already start traveling forwards when I dip. The log wants to roll off my chest to begin with. You miss it forward. Like it just doesn't make, for whatever reason, to me, it just doesn't make sense for strongmen to wear Olympic weightlifting shoes unless it's an event where you're short and need to gain some height, like power stairs or stones. But outside of that, I think Olympic weightlifting shoes are not worth. I would rather spend that money on food.
You know what? I like that. And that's something that especially if you do wear that, I've always worn them for logs since I've learned it. And it's always okay, this sucks with the pick because you're now in a shitty position. You can't like sit back into it. You're almost fighting that log even more. But then it's like, all right, if it's overhead, I'm more stable. But now, because I'm going to be shifting back into strongman for the next, after my meet in November. So I'll be going back to training for nationals for that. And I'm going to fuck around with that because I never even thought, like, I was just like, yes, this is what you do. And it's always that old stigma of like, oh, you just see you people like stronger than you doing it. And it's like, okay, this must be just the thing. And I'm totally going to be like, oh, I'm a fucking idiot. I'm going to do a little bit more digging into if I even need them for that. And so that's a good point. You had mentioned that. And I'm like, fuck, that's a whole different perspective.
Yeah. And I never recommend anybody takes advice from somebody who is the best at something. I never recommend that to begin with. There's probably a reason outside of their shoes they are the best or one of the best at something specific, and it's probably a variable you yourself cannot help. But if you just look at the way log is set up, it just doesn't. I mean, in theory, with a log and really with any press, I don't think there's anything wrong with your knees coming out over your toes. I don't think it's unhealthy. I think it's perfectly natural. But if you think about a log, if it's an item that wants to travel forward like a dumbbell or a log already, a circus dumbbell, why am I going to allow my knees to travel forward at all? And then I have to redirect my force and put my knees back over my heels before I start generating force upward. Like that's right. And most people, and a lot of amateurs argue, well, I can dip further if I do it that way versus a plie style. Literally, like if watch a ballerina do a plie and watch what their hips do, their tailbone drops straight to the ground. I was like, why am I going to waste energy redirecting my knees over my heels to generate force upward when I can bypass that?
Yeah, and
so that's
you're
just
right
that,
because I think there is a I mean, granted, I've been out of strongman for a few years, like competing. I just competed again for the first time this year again, and it was awesome. But back a few years ago, it was how much gear could you wear? What can you like? What sort of you know positive impact can you
Yep.
have as a quick fix, almost band-aid? You see it a lot with like elbow sleeves, right? You see a bunch like super like heavier and heavier and heavier elbow sleeves. You see competitors' hands turning fucking like dead person gray. And it's like you
Purple.
just yeah, like you just see these and it's
They
like,
can't sing
are you
along.
right? And it's like, are you attacking a problem or are you just putting a band-aid on a situation instead of actually getting stronger? Here, let's try this again. Let's see how this
Yep.
goes. And I think we're back. I think we're back. The power of the internet
Yeah.
is not really having a hell of a day today. So we were talking about the Olympic lifting shoes and putting band-aids on things instead of really fixing a potential weakness or not just actually building real strength, just putting a bigger band-aid on, well, like thicker elbow sleeves or whatever you have. So what's your thought on that?
Yeah. I do think I think there's a strategy to using different plies of gear. Like they like Cerberus makes a multiply makes a couple different multiply sleeves, and I like them, but I wear mine loose.
Yeah.
I'm not a huge fan of compression. There's this false sense of trust in neoprene nowadays in like the fitness community. Like neoprene's a great thing. I love my sleeves, but strapping more and more on eventually becomes detrimental. All of a sudden,
Mm-hmm.
joints can't pivot to their full degree. You can't clean an axle. Your rack position's completely altered. Your body awareness drops drastically. So a lot of times, what you see is the guys that are shoving more and more gear on aren't ever going to be very good. And
Mm-hmm.
that's in that in powerlifting, I feel like it can be different if you know the gear, but something like strongman, it comes and goes in waves where people will just forget we have to be an athlete, and the more gear you have on, the less athletic you're going to be.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny you see that shift in the strongman competitions as well. It's like they'll shift to crazy heavy and then they shift to like these drag races where everything's super fast and it gets a little bit uh as a competitor, as a novice competitor or an intermediate competitor, whatever the fuck you want to call me, it gets frustrating because an event will come down to a half a second. It should be like a very clear divide between the people who do it and the people that can't. It shouldn't be the differentiation between how fast somebody clicks a stopwatch for strongman, right?
So it shouldn't be. And for us, at least at my level, you see that's more the heavier, the more drag race is more dependent on the contest. Like World's Strongest Man it's a notorious drag race. It 100%
Mm,
is a notorious drag race. The Arnold Classic, traditionally very heavy. Um, they did hit a peak with a yoke run one year where it was like 1,500 pounds and like three or four guys got hurt. And then the Arnold made the decision like, okay, there's a limit on that event. So they pay attention, but traditionally it's going to be the Arnold and then Michelle Classic, which are the heaviest contests. Um, and then
mm.
Worlds is the drag race. But uh, rule of third to to not complete maybe 80% done, and then I expect a damn near the other third.
Yeah,
Like
yeah, for
that's
sure. Yeah.
usually how you know an event's been weighted correctly.
Hmm. Yeah. Now, in terms of, I kind of want to break into the nerdy shit, right? Because one of the biggest,
Yeah.
like the comments that we get with bringing high end athletes like yourself on is really digging deep into training, right? So I want to break down how you focus on not only building your overhead press, which is obviously record setting overhead press, while not letting other things kind of take a back seat. Because I think a lot of people would fall into the trap